It's always kind of interesting when you get the unintended consequences which come from regulation. We all want clean air, we all want clean water, and some of the impacts. So we'll start out with questioning, and I'd like to begin actually with Mr. Felix from my home area. Aerial application of pesticides play a major role in protecting our farmlands, forests, and other invasive species, and enhancing the production of food and fiber. Mr. Felix, how will the expanded MPDES permit requirement impact your ability to be able to serve farmers, local governments, and others that rely on timely economic applications of pesticides?
Well, I think currently those kind of applications represent about 40% of our business. And with the risks that go along with the citizen suit efforts that can be done, I'm really considering not doing those applications anymore. So as far as the right-of-way work on the canals, they wouldn't be done timely anymore. I would lose that revenue and also wouldn't need as many employees to get that work done. And the water users would have to be adding to their arsenal of some way of controlling that problem, because it's not going to work for us. As far as the mosquito and the aquatic applications that we've done for algae control and for junk fish species in the DOW waters around there, again, probably wouldn't be able to make those applications anymore. So how they would accomplish that, I don't know. But it's going to put such a strain on my business, I don't think I would be able to accomplish those anymore.
So simply from proposed regulatory requirements, you're considering just not doing it anymore.
Yep,
simply can't afford to do it. Is there going to be collateral damage to the community at that point, farm and ranch community?
Yes, I think so, especially on the irrigation projects and the communities that we would cease to do mosquito applications for.
How will these new regulations, do you see them impacting or having some good impacts in regards to environmental or public health in terms of expanding protections?
Congressman, we've been doing this work for years and years, and the EPA has regulated those products that we use to the point that we're using safer and more appropriate products all the time. And we see no adverse environmental effects from what we're doing. So it's not going to change anything. It's just going to make compliance more difficult and more risky for us to be involved in business.
Thank you. Next question, perhaps we can have Mr. Nelson, Mr. Schaefer from our two farm bureaus maybe address this issue. EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson has proposed retaining the current standard for coarse particulate matter. However, there's no agricultural exemption for farm dust, and this uncertainty still lingers throughout the farming community. Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Nelson, in previous years when the EPA has revised air quality standards for the Clean Air Act, has the agency's final rule always reflected what the EPA initially proposed concerning farm dust? Mr. Schaefer?
You know, I think it's very easy to look at recent history regarding the EPA. An environmental organization will file a lawsuit against them, and instead of defending themselves in a court, they'll settle and thus promulgating a new regulation. We've seen this time and time again. And I think that's the danger of this, that's the way a new regulation is being developed. Unfortunately, my feeling is it's the obligation of Congress to develop regulations where it can be brought out in the open, debated, and come with some common sense, reasonable regulation. But instead, it's almost like they're encouraging somebody to sue them so they can settle and just develop a new regulation upon agriculture.
Mr. Nelson?
A couple of concerns that I have, and Carl alluded to one of them. I think the intent in Congress, when you look at the Clean Air Act, is one thing, and I think what EPA is proposing is another. And I guess I'm very concerned where we have farmers in certain parts of this country right now that can't even comply with the particulate matter that they're proposing. As I said in my testimony, when we harvested this fall, and you see a natural cause happen when you're harvesting a crop that is ripened, you know, farmers have no control over that. And I think what irritates farmers the most is, getting back to a comment that was made earlier, there just needs to be some common sense put into this equation as we talk about this. But in response to your question, I think I am very concerned that, EPA keeps proposing these, that keeps handcuffing farmers across this country, not just in Illinois, with their proposed rules.
I believe that is an important issue, Ms. Nelson. I appreciate you bringing that up because we're seeing some activist groups now encouraging expansion of the particulate matter out into the western states to where when the wind blows in, I know in my part of the country, and I know Mr. Felix can speak to this as well, we have half of Arizona airborne over us every spring, just in terms of the dust coming in. So that certainly does be able to create some challenges for us. Appreciate you bringing that up. Small business owners have raised concerns that the EPA and its rulemaking in terms of clarifying waters in the U.S. is not adhering to mandatory requirements of the Regulatory Flexibility Act and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act as well. The Farm Bureau Federation and other groups wrote to the EPA to express their concerns on this matter, and we would like to be able to submit that in today's hearing record as well. Given the significant and potentially devastating effect of this rule on small businesses, and it is critical that the EPA ensure small businesses have a fair and meaningful opportunity to participate in the federal rulemaking, that the agency completes all of the necessary cost-benefits analysis. What are some of the costs you see coming out of some of these rulings, potential rulings for EPA dust control?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, how are you going to comply? In harvesting, I think you're very limited in what you can do to try to meet that requirement. I look to my colleagues in California that might have a lot of fresh produce that they drive down a dirt road. They're out of compliance under the proposed rules that they are pushing forward. So I think the compliance issue is one thing that rises to the top of every business person involved in agriculture and trying to comply with it.
Great. Mr. Schaefer, do you have any comments?
Oh, I would just echo that, but just for instance, in Pennsylvania, we have a large amount of dairy farmers, for instance, and they depend on making hay for cattle feed. Well, you can't bale hay and put it away wet, or you're going to have spontaneous combustion. So just by the definition of it, you have to let hay dry. Thus, when you go to bale it, you're creating dust. So I honestly, as I said in my testimony, it's laughable when they say use common sense. Well, this is common sense, and to try to regulate particulate matter over dust and things like that, that is not common sense.
Yeah, the uncertainty is certainly a question. Mr. Felix, could you maybe address, has it been your experience in terms of applying pesticides, that you'll wake up one morning and you have new labeling that you may not have been made aware of that can put you out of compliance?
Certainly, this happens quite frequently. As the product comes down the pipeline to us and the label changes come, we're not notified of it. The only responsibility we have is reading that label as we get it. And we've lost uses in the middle of the season. For instance, I was supplying a product to spinach, and there was a complaint made to the Department of Agriculture, and they came in to do the investigation. I went out and got a label off the new products, and spinach wasn't on the label. But the material we carried over for the winter, it was. And so these kind of things are going on all the time on a daily basis, and that's why in my testimony I mentioned we've become experts on the label and the proper use of the products in compliance with that label, and that was one lesson that I almost learned the hard way.
Okay. Thank you. Just a couple more questions so we can get our other members involved here as well. Mr. Vester, due to the uncertainty of the process to obtain a general permit, have you started to consider changes that you will need to make in order to comply with new permitting requirements?
Well, once again, we're dealing with U.S. EPA. Most of our farmers have no clue this is there. They receive no notification from anybody. If they read the National Register every morning, they might discover that there's been a new rule. We have spent a great deal of time on SPCC spill prevention, control, and countermeasures. And we were finally able to obtain an extension on implementation of that regulation. EPA had promised. We debated that for 5 years with EPA. A plan came out with a plan which we had agreed to with a promised 5-year implementation, and then all of a sudden it changed to 1 year. There was promised education to know what to do. That was never done. Most farmers, even today, when they got the extension, didn't know what they got the extension for. There's very little information that comes from EPA. It's assumed that we know everything they do. It's difficult to do. We in the rice industry consider and debate the fact that we should be exempt because of our water issues on the production of rice is return flow irrigation water and stormwater runoff. Those two are exempt by law in the Clean Water Act, period. But EPA is trying to circumvent that by the fact of writing regulations that bring on environmentalist lawsuits. That's the way they regulate now, judicially, not legislatively. And that's what we face each and every day. In the MPDS permit, as I said earlier, they tell you to use as little chemicals as possible with no set amount, which opens that to lawsuit trying to establish what amount. Then they say that you can only use it as a last resort. So who decides what's last resort? And last resort doesn't work. You know, we're dealing with an agency that writes rules for what we do, and they don't know what we do. They don't know how we do it. They just know that there ought to be rules for it. We have people who have spent their entire life on concrete trying to tell farmers how they should run and operate their business, how they should plant crops, how they should grow crops. The U.S. farmer produces the most abundant, the safest, cheapest supply of food to the American public, and we get beat over the head every year because we're not doing it right. You know, I don't know what our answer is. You know, how do you not spray a pesticide on your rice to take care of insects, disease, and grasses and weeds when it's an aquatic crop? Now, the water seldom ever leaves that farm because in our state, most of the water is retrieved, placed in reservoirs, and reused. In the 1980s, EPA did a study in western Tennessee on rice fields where water was put in and where it came out. And the results of that study were the fact that the rice was cleaner coming out of the rice field than when it was put in, whether it was surface water or well water, because of the marsh-type atmosphere of a rice field. But that study was never released. It was never made public because it didn't give the results they wanted. Water coming out of a rice field is safer and cleaner than the water going in because of its marsh-type atmosphere. It's a daily battle with EPA for us, and we have continuing regulation that, what's our answer? I don't really know.